Welcome to the Soccer Chaplains United podcast from the touchline. And now, here's your host, Rev Brad.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the podcast. So we're in the midst of Holy Week. And if you don't know, each day of the week during Holy Week is named for a particular event that happened in the build-up to Jesus rising from the dead. And so Sunday, the previous Sunday that we just experienced was Palm Sunday. Jesus rides triumphantly into Jerusalem. People are waving palm branches and saying, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Monday is known as Miracle Monday. Jesus goes into Jerusalem. He goes into the temple. And as he does, on his way in, he performs one of the oddest miracles that we ever have on record. It's a negative miracle. He actually curses a tree and it dies. And of course, this is a metaphor for sort of the spiritual life of Israel and what Israel failed to do in drawing the nations unto God. Tuesday is known as Temple Tuesday. Jesus goes into the temple and he's teaching. Now, he had been in the temple earlier. He had overthrown some tables on Monday as he went in. But Tuesday, Temple Tuesday as it's known, is a time where Jesus is intentionally teaching. And he shares different parables and stories. Wednesday is known as Spy Wednesday. Again, Jesus is in Jerusalem teaching, but probably this is the time that Judas realizes Jesus isn't who he thought he was, and he's disappointed, and he goes and betrays Jesus, hands him over, or agrees to hand him over to the religious leaders. Thursday is known as Maundy Thursday. Jesus and his disciples, his followers, his best friends, observe the Passover meal a day early. It's kind of awkward, but they go in, observe the meal. Friday, we know is Good Friday. Jesus is arrested. He's maliciously tried, and then he's crucified. Saturday is Vigil Saturday. People are waiting. People are waiting to see. They're waiting. They're hiding. And then Sunday, of course, is Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday. Jesus rises from the dead and appears, and our world is forever changed. So what I want to do is, typically in the past, I've taken the fact that the podcast comes out on Wednesdays, and I've talked about Spy Wednesday. I was going back through the years, and I was like, I've spoken about Spy Wednesday several times from a couple different angles. Last year, I shared on Psalm 22, and actually shared out of the soccer Psalms, Psalm 22, the words of Jesus from the cross that he utters. And then as followers of his would have recognized, would have remembered, they would have recounted the words of Psalm 22. And in other moments, I've shared different aspects of maybe what happened on the Wednesday preceding Easter. But today, what I want to do is take a look at Temple Tuesday, and I want to look at the fact that Jesus' authority is questioned. Friends, if we look at our world today, we see many, many places where authority is questioned around the world. So here in the United States, there's many times there's marches, there's activations going on where people are rising up. We've had these things the last couple of years, no kings protests. So that's an example of authority being questioned. I was speaking with some of the guys on the team this week and asking them, hey, where are places where you've seen authority questioned? And certainly sometimes in a squad, players can question the authority of a coach. They can maybe question the authority of a board of directors or a club president, however the club's managed. Sometimes fans can question the authority. Recently, there have been several stories where a high-profile club want to bring in a particular manager, and then the fans are sort of rebelling, revolting. They're making their voices heard because they don't want that manager. They don't want that coach because maybe something that coach has said or done in the past, or a political motivation, or maybe they've just gotten behind a particular player, and maybe that player has created offense or question or controversy. And so the fans make their voice heard, and they question the authority to bring in a particular individual, to bring in a particular thing. So what I want to do is look at this moment that occurs on Temple Tuesday, where Jesus, as he's teaching in the temple courts, is questioned by the religious leaders. Because I think many times, whether you're a Christian, whether you're a person who abhors faith or sort of religious, organized religion, as sometimes people will put it, when you struggle with those things, I think sometimes we will question, we will struggle, we will rebel, we will fight against authority and figures in authority. And so I want to take a few minutes and explore a couple passages with you and talk about what do we do, how ought we respond, what does it look like when authority is wrong and abused and when authority is not, and is it appropriate to question? I think those are some of the things that will come out of the podcast time today. So if you'd like, you could join me. I'm going to read Matthew chapter 21, verses 23 through 27. I'm reading from the NIV. Jesus entered the temple courts, and while he was teaching, the chief priests and the elders of the people came to him. "By what authority are you doing these things?" they asked, "and who gave you this authority?" Jesus replied, "I will also ask you one question. If you answer me, I will tell you by what authority I am doing these things. John's baptism, where did it come from? Was it from heaven or from men?" They discussed it amongst themselves and said, "If we say from heaven, he will ask, 'Then why didn't you believe him?' But if we say from men, we are afraid of the people, for they all hold that John was a prophet." So they answered Jesus, "We don't know." Then Jesus said, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things." So just to set the stage a little bit, the chief priests, the elders, the teachers of the law, these were most likely Pharisees. They were religious leaders of the day. They were the representatives of organized religion. And the people held them in high regard. The people held them in sort of with this idea that they're an authority over us. They are close to God. They represent us to God. And so we got to stay in their good graces. You can also see a little bit of the power trip going on because the chief priests and elders are also saying, man, if we say the wrong thing, they held John the Baptist in high regard as a prophet. They could turn on us. We could lose our power. We could lose our influence. We could lose our voice, our sway with the people. And so there's some charged sort of religious political tension that's going on here in this passage. Jesus now is coming in towards the end of these religious leaders putting up with him because of the things he's preaching and teaching. And so they are questioning him here early. Again, he came in the day before. He overturns the money-changing tables in the temple. He's sort of got this zealous sense of, hey, this is a place of worship, but it's been turned into a place of commerce, and it's wrong. And he calls it out. And he calls it out amongst many of the religious leaders. He calls out sin, wrong, indifference. And Jesus goes on in Matthew 21 to tell a couple parables. And in it, he's very critical and condemning of the religious leaders. And so we can see sort of the setup here is the chief priests, the elders want to know where Jesus thinks he derives his authority because it's in conflict with them. Jesus is winning the people over, and this is greatly to the annoyance of the religious leaders of the day. So Jesus asks, this was typical in rabbinical fashion. You typically don't just answer a question. If someone were to say, where are you going? What are you thinking you're going to do? You typically would answer it with a question. So in the same way that they ask, hey, what authority are you doing these things? Jesus asks a question as well. And this was sort of known sort of kind of exchange that would go on. And by it, it's interesting because Jesus is able to see and put the religious leaders to the test because are they really open to hearing what Jesus might have to say? Are they really open to understanding what Jesus has come to know is true about himself and was true about his cousin, John the Baptist. What do we do with questions of authority? There are people that are put into authority over us, certainly. We have leaders, we have governors and presidents and other types of politicians. Maybe in our workplace, we have managers, we have bosses, we have executives. They're put in authority over us. Even within the church, I myself, my ordination, I am under the authority of other ordained leaders, teachers, elders that are part of the church. And so they have the right to call me out. They have the right to question me in particular moments. They have the right to confront me, and I likewise have a right to confront them. We have a right to supporting each other as well. And so this question of authority comes because Jesus is actually interfering with where the church leaders really want him to be with the people. And so I think sometimes when we find a strong figure that's maybe preaching truth or teaching truth, we struggle because that truth doesn't always align with the way that we want to behave, we want to live. I have 4 teenage daughters. They know that I'm older. They know that I'm quote-unquote wiser. Now, I don't always demonstrate that. I make mistakes. But sometimes the question of my authority comes because I say something to them, and I say, this is the way we're going to go. This is the way we're going to live as a family. And they question my authority because they don't want to live that way, because they want something else to go their way, even if their way might lead to danger or something that isn't right for themselves personally or for us as a family. And so sometimes there's a question of authority. Other times, authority can be questioned in other ways and other moments, for sure. And so what do we do in terms of a response? Jesus tells us that the way that we're supposed to love God and others has a particular order. And he shares this in Matthew 22, 34 through 40. And I want to share that with you as well. The question comes to Jesus again as he's teaching, what is the greatest commandment in the law? And so Jesus replies, love the Lord. I'm reading Matthew 22, 36 through 40. Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replies, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. What I love there is Jesus gives the 2 commandments. Actually, there's you could almost interpret a third slipped in there, is loving others as ourselves. It does mean that we're supposed to love ourselves in appropriate ways. In these ways, Jesus is kind of giving us a good sense of hierarchy. He's giving us a good sense of structure and order to the way that we ought to order our lives and our loves. Do we accept, receive the authority of God in such a way that we love him with everything about us? And in turn, that love of God in that way ought to frame, shape, mold, transform the way that we interact with others and even ourselves. Sometimes we might wonder, what does it look like when a tyrant is in authority over us? When a government or someone, maybe an employer, a boss, tells us things that orders us to do things that we know are wrong and that we ought not to do. I think what it shows here is that in this text is loving God with all of our being means a couple of things. It means sometimes we have to accept the place and position that we have and those that have been put in authority over us. And if that command or order does not directly go against what God says, we're called to be obedient to it. We're called to follow it through, to work on it. Now, if that order, command, if that thing does conflict with God's authority and what he's commanded us as individuals, as followers of Jesus, as Christian people to do, there is a case for not doing it. Maybe we might say there's passive resistance, or there might need to be something stronger than passive resistance, an actual no, I won't do that thing, even at the risk of our own lives. But also, too, it shows, too, that there's a sense of authority in which God is supreme. And if God is not followed, if God is not respected and loved, we're going to struggle with a sense of the rest of our lives. If we don't accept God and his authority, how much more will we accept those that God's put in authority over us? I think we'll always struggle with that. When we see wrong and injustice, if we've not accepted God's sense of authority, we won't have much of a legal or religious leg, an ethical or moral leg to stand on in calling out those injustices. Well, I want to fast forward in terms of where we're going today, because I want to get to the place in the text where they actually come to arrest Jesus. And if you know the story, Jesus has a meal with his best friends, washes their feet. There's a little bit of tension in the room. There's some people that not really realizing what's going on here on this Thursday night, as it were, this Maundy Thursday. Judas leaves. He goes and he has secured the betrayal. He's going to lead them to the place where Jesus and the rest of the disciples are going for the night. And as Jesus and his disciples walk out from the upper room, walk out from the meal, they go into the garden. And Jesus is praying. The disciples, his closest ones, fall asleep. They're exhausted. They're tired. And Judas comes. And I just want to read from you from the Gospel of Mark, beginning chapter 14, beginning in verse 43 through 50. Just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared. Again, they're in the garden. With him was a crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now the betrayer, that's Judas, had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, Rabbi, and kissed him. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Am I leading a rebellion, said Jesus, that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you, teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled. Then everyone deserted Jesus and fled. There's a lot to unpack here, but essentially what I want to do is just get into these points where Jesus' authority is sort of, again, questioned, and we see the response of people to him. You can see that the religious leaders were still scared of the people. So they come at night, and they come with an armed guard, just imagining that Jesus would put up a fight. But he doesn't. In fact, Jesus says the opposite of that. He says, am I leading a rebellion that you've come this way? And he says, look, every day I was in the temple courts, you could have had your moment with me. But the scriptures have to be fulfilled. And Jesus is referring there to a passage in Isaiah 53, you can check it out, where it speaks of the suffering servant. And it speaks of, it's a prophetic word to say this is what's going to happen to the Messiah, to the one. And he's going to be led away quietly. He's not going to put up a fight. And suffering is going to be his pathway. And Jesus has understood that these things are going to happen. Now, again, part of our response to Jesus, and this is the question I want to get to, is what is your response and my response to Jesus? I think in many ways, as Jesus enters into our lives, or we become aware of what Jesus is asking us to do, how he's asking us to be, the cost of following him, there's a resistance in us if we're honest. I've tried to follow Jesus for a number of years, most of my life, in fact, I'd say. My parents raised me this way. I grew up this way. And yet there's moments when I struggle with even the way that Jesus calls me to be. There's times when I question his authority, just like my teenagers question me as a dad. And I ask, is this really the way? Is this really the thing you want me to do? Can't be. And I have trouble accepting that at times. And then I see the ways that God works through a particular situation or moment, and I understand and know that something else is true. Something is true in which I shouldn't have questioned God's authority or his way of doing something. I should have surrendered myself, because I've learned over time and through various experiences that his way is best. He knows what is best, but it's still a struggle if I'm honest. So it's not a one and done kind of thing where we just love God once and we've got it all figured out. It's a continual thing where we have to learn what it is to surrender our own will, our desires. And there's times when Jesus tells us to do something. There's times when we're called to act a certain way or behave a certain way, and we struggle because it doesn't feel right or we want to go our own way. We struggle to accept Jesus' authority in our lives. But I'll tell you, my friends, if you do, when you do, that acceptance of him is perhaps one of the best things you and I can do in our lives, because as we give over all of ourselves to him, he gives it back that much more. He gives it back that much more. Well, my friends, I don't know where you are today in your relationship with Jesus. I would say this time is really key and important as we go through Holy Week, as we look at the events of the last days of Jesus' earthly life, before he's crucified, before he dies, before he's buried and rises again. These moments can teach us. These moments can reveal in us, even if we've been following Jesus for a long time, how it is that we respond to his authority, how it is we respond to the things he teaches and shows us to do with his life. As we close today, I want to close with a reading, meditation. This comes from the book Bread and Wine, Readings for Lent and Easter. The excerpt is from Wendell Berry's Jayber Crow. It's a novel that's really brilliant. But this little excerpt gets at the sense of, sometimes we want to tell God the right thing to do, the way to do it. And there's really something to understanding God's sovereignty and his authority and accepting and receiving that in the person of Jesus. Let me read. For a while again, I couldn't pray. I didn't dare to. In the most secret place of my soul, I wanted to beg the Lord to reveal himself in power. I wanted to tell him that it was time for his coming. If there was anything at all to what he had promised, why didn't he come in glory with angels and lay his hands on the hurt children and awaken the dead soldiers and restore the burned villages and the blasted and poisoned land? Why didn't he cow our arrogance? But thinking such things was as dangerous as praying them. I knew who had thought such thoughts before. Let Christ, the King of Israel, descend now from the cross, that we may see and believe. Where in my own arrogance was I going to hide? Where did I get my knack for being a fool? If I could advise God, why didn't I just advise him, like our great preachers and politicians, to be on our side and give us victory? I had to turn around and wade out of the mire myself. Christ did not descend from the cross except into the grave. And why not otherwise? Wouldn't it have put fine comical expressions on the faces of the scribes and the chief priests and the soldiers if at that moment he had come down in power and glory. Why didn't he do it? Why hasn't he done it at any one of 1,000 good times between then and now? I knew the answer. I knew it a long time before I could admit it, for all the suffering of the world is in it. He didn't. He hasn't. Because from the moment he did, he would be the absolute tyrant of the world, and we would be his slaves. Even those who hated him and hated one another and hated their own souls would have to believe in him then. From that moment, the possibility that we might be bound to him and he to us and us to one another by love forever would be ended. And so I thought, he must forbear to reveal his power and glory by presenting himself as himself, and must be present only in the ordinary miracle of the existence of his creatures. Those who wish to see him must see him in the poor, the hungry, the hurt, the wordless creatures, the groaning and travailing beautiful world. I would sometimes be horrified in every moment I was alone. I could see no escape. We are too tightly tangled together to be able to separate ourselves from one another, either by good or by evil. We all are involved in all and any good, and in all and any evil. For any sin, we all suffer. That is why our suffering is endless. It is why God grieves, and Christ's wounds still are bleeding. My friends, there's a sense in which the authority of Jesus rests in the way that he came. He came as the way Isaiah 53 describes him. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was like a lamb led to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. His way was a way of suffering, so that we might behold him, so that sin might be eradicated by faith and belief in him, the one who loved us enough to die on a cross. My friends, bless you this Holy Week as you ponder the miraculous wonder of Jesus and his authority in our lives. This has been Rep. Brad coming to you from the Touchline.